In the old days, in the deep of winter, there was one rule you did not break. When the nights are longest and the wind comes down off the mountain like something hunting, you do not go outside. You do not look up, because that is when the dead ride. One young man broke that rule to save the woman he loved. He lived, but what he saw in the snow that night, he kept secret for the rest of his life. Tonight, for the first time, he tells it. Welcome to Nordic Tales. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell us where in the world you're listening from tonight. It's good to know we're not alone in the dark. So lower the lights and listen closely. This is a story from the deep midwinter, from a narrow valley in the old days, when the nights were longest and the snow lay so heavy that the farms were sealed off from one another for weeks at a time. In that valley, as in many across the north, the people kept a custom in the 12 nights between Christmas and Epiphany. They marked every door and every barn and every stable with a cross drawn in tar. They left ale and food standing on the table when they went to bed. They brought every tool and every blade indoors and left nothing of iron out in the yard. And on the wildest of those nights, when the wind came down off the mountain like something hunting, they did not go outside. Not for any reason. Because in the dead heart of winter, the old people said, the dead do not lie still. They ride. They called it the Oskoreia, the Åsgårdsreia, the wild ride. A host of the restless dead, men and women who in life had been too wicked for heaven and too proud for hell, and so were given neither, only the long, cold sky to ride through, every winter, forever. At their head rode Guro Rysserova. Gudrun of the horse's tail, they called her, for she trailed a long tail behind her like a beast, and her eyes were holes burned in the dark. Beside her rode Sigurd Svein, a dead king on a dead horse, and behind them came all the others, a great black tide of riders on black horses, the hooves striking sparks from the empty air, the bridles hung with bells that you could hear long before you saw them. They rode to gather the year's dead, and to take the living foolish enough to be out under the open sky. They would sweep a man up off the road and carry him for miles, and set him down in a field he had never seen, half frozen and witless. Or they would not set him down at all. The old people did not tell these tales to frighten the children. They told them so the children would live. Now in this valley, on a farm near the head of it, lived a young man named Anders. His father, old Eirik, had died that autumn, and so the farm was Anders's now, the house and the byre and the few thin cattle, and all the old customs that came with them. And Anders kept those customs the way a man keeps a coat he has outgrown. He drew the tar crosses, because his mother had, and her mother before her. He left the ale out, but in his heart he had stopped believing. He had been to the market town. He had heard the new talk, that the old stories were just stories, that the riders in the sky were only storm and shadow, and the fears of frightened people in the dark. He was young, and the young are sure. And there was another reason his mind was elsewhere that winter. Across the valley, on a farm he could see as a thin curl of smoke on the far slope, lived a girl named Marit. They were promised to one another. They were to be married in the spring. And Anders thought of very little else. It was on the 7th night of Yule, the wildest night of all, that the word came. A boy came stumbling up through the drifts at dusk, blue-lipped and gasping, sent from the far farm before the dark closed the valley for good. Marit had taken the fever. It had come on her fast, the way it does in winter, and it had gone deep into her chest, and she was sinking. They had sent for the only person who could help, old Birgitte, the wise woman, who knew the herbs and the old healing, and who lived an hour's hard walk down the valley, on Anders's side of the river. Could Anders fetch her? Could he bring her across, tonight, before it was too late? The boy could go no further, and Anders stood in his doorway with the wind tearing at the flame in his hand, and he looked up at the sky. It was a wild sky. Cloud raced across the moon like something fleeing, and from far off, high up, he thought, just for a moment, that he heard a sound that was not the wind. He told himself it was the wind. His mother's voice came back to him then, though she was 3 years dead. Not on the Yule nights, Anders. Whatever calls you, however it calls, you do not go out under the sky on the Yule nights. He stood a long time in the door. But what is an old woman's warning against the face of the girl you are going to marry, lying gray and burning on the far side of the valley, waiting for help that only you can bring? He told himself the tales were only tales. He told himself a man does not let the woman he loves die because he is afraid of the dark. So he took down his father's good horse from the warm byre, and he saddled it with cold and clumsy hands, and he led it out past the barn door with its tar cross, out under the racing sky. He would fetch old Birgit. He would carry her back. He would save Marit's life, and in the spring they would laugh about the night he rode out in the storm. And he swung up into the saddle and turned the horse down the valley, into the dark, and the door of the warm house fell shut behind him. For a while it was only cold, bitter, breath-stealing cold, and the squeak of snow under the hooves, and the black trees crowding the track on either side. He kept his eyes on the way ahead and his mind on Marit, and he made good time down the first long slope. But then the night began to change. The wind, which had been roaring through the high pines, fell away all at once, and the silence that came after it was worse than any wind. The horse began to fight him. It tossed its head and rolled its eyes and tried to turn back toward home, and it took all his strength to hold it to the track. And then, from somewhere high above and far behind, he heard it again. The sound that was not the wind. A faint, bright, jangling sound, like 100 small bells riding on the cold air. And under it, lower, a deeper sound. The baying of hounds. But there were no hounds in that valley. There had been no hounds for years. The bells grew louder, and Anders, against every sense he had, looked up. They were coming down out of the north, out of the black between the mountains, and they filled the sky. A great host of riders, more than he could count, pouring through the air the way a flood pours down a ravine. Black horses, but not like any horse he had ever seen, too tall, too thin, their legs moving wrong, their eyes and their open mouths glowing a dull and smoking red, like coals under ash. And on their backs, the riders, gray and ragged and wrong, some sitting straight as kings, and some slumped like the long dead, their cloaks streaming, their faces turned down toward the earth, toward him. At the front rode a woman on the tallest horse of all, and behind her streamed something long and dark, a tail, a horse's tail, dragging through the air. Guro Rysserova. He knew her at once, though he had never believed in her, the way you know a thing in a nightmare. The bells were a roar now. The frozen valley lit a sick and flickering red beneath them, and the whole vast host of the dead bent in the air and turned and came down toward the small, dark figure on the track. The horse screamed and threw him. One moment he was in the saddle, the next he was in the snow on his back with the breath knocked out of him, and the horse was gone, bolting up the track toward home, and he was alone under that descending sky. And in that moment, with the bells filling the whole world, every old word his mother had ever said came back to him at once. If they come, and you cannot get indoors, lie down. Lie flat on your face in the snow. Spread your arms. Make of your own body the shape of the cross, the one thing they cannot ride through. And do not look up, and do not speak, and do not move. Whatever you hear, whatever you feel, until the bells have passed and the silence comes back. He threw himself onto his face in the snow. He flung his arms out wide. He pressed himself down into the cold until the ice burned his cheek, and he made himself the shape of the cross, and he waited. And the Åsgårdsreia came down on top of him like a falling mountain. The cold went through him like nothing he had ever known, a cold that was not of the body, but of the soul. And the air was full of the thunder of hooves that touched no ground, and the stink of smoke and old graves. And the bells, the endless bells. He could feel them passing over him, around him, the great host of them, the wind of their riding tearing at his clothes, trying to lift him, trying to take him up into the ride. He pressed himself down, and he did not move. But he could not keep from seeing. With his cheek in the snow and his eyes half open, he saw the horses pass close on either side, the burning hooves, and he saw the faces of the riders looking down at him, and he knew them. There, an old man who had drowned in the river when Anders was a boy. There, a woman who had died mad in a far cottage. And there, he almost cried out, almost broke the cross of his own body. There, riding gray and silent among the dead, was the face of his own father, old Eirik, looking down at his son in the snow with eyes like burned-out holes and no knowing left in them at all. And then the worst of it. The very last of the host came over him, the stragglers, the new dead, the ones gathered up that very winter and not yet wholly turned to shadow. And among them rode a figure smaller and slighter than the rest, on a black horse, in a white shift, with long fair hair streaming loose in the wind of the ride. And Anders, face down in the snow, looked up into the face of Marit, his Marit, gray now and far away, and lit by that sick red light, but hers. She was looking down at him as she passed, and for one instant something flickered in her dead face, some last guttering ember of who she had been, and her hand opened, and something fell from it, down through the freezing air, and landed in the snow beside his outflung hand. And then she was carried on, up and away with all the rest, north into the black between the mountains, and the bells began to fade, and the red light died, and the thunder of the hooves grew small and smaller, and then there was nothing at all but the cold and the dark, and a young man lying in the shape of a cross in the snow, screaming a name into the ground. How long he lay there he never knew. When at last he could move, when the silence had truly come back and the moon had steadied in a clearing sky, he lifted his head, and his hand closed in the snow on the thing that had fallen. It was small and hard and cold. It was a ring, a plain silver ring, the betrothal ring he himself had given to Marit, that she had worn on her finger and sworn never to take off. He did not fetch old Birgit. He knew now that there was no longer any reason to. He walked, all the rest of that night, down the valley and across the frozen river and up the far slope. Walked because his horse was gone and because he could not have sat still if he tried, and he came to Marit's farm in the gray before dawn. The house was full of weeping. They told him what he already knew. The fever had taken her in the night. She had gone quiet, and then she had gone, at the darkest hour, the hour when the wind fell still and the bells passed over the valley. He did not tell them what he had seen. He never told anyone for the rest of his long life. But he opened his cold hand and he showed them the silver ring, and that was all the answer he could give. Anders lived a long time after that night. He married, in the end, years later, and he had children and grandchildren, and he grew old on the farm at the head of the valley. But he was never again a young man sure of anything. Every winter, when the 12 nights came, he was the first to draw the tar crosses. On every door and every barn and every stable, dark and careful and complete. He left the ale and the food on the table. He brought in every blade and every tool. And on the wildest of the Yule nights, when the wind came down off the mountain like something hunting, he gathered his family close by the fire, and he barred the door, and he did not let one of them set foot outside, not for any reason in the world. And sometimes his grandchildren would ask him why, and beg him for the story, and he would only look into the fire for a long while, and turn a small, worn silver ring on its cord around his neck, and say that some doors you open only once, and that the dead are not as far from the living as we would like to believe, least of all in the deep heart of winter, when the nights are long and the sky is full of riding. So when the wind rises some black midwinter night, and you hear, far off and high up, a sound like 100 small bells, do not go to the window. Do not go out under the sky. Lie still and let them pass. And in the morning, when the silence has come back, be glad of every warm and ordinary face still at your table. Thank you for listening. If this story found its way under your skin, subscribe to Nordic Tales, so the dark always knows where to find you. Until next time, sleep well, and whatever you hear out in the snow tonight, let it ride on by.